We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. We're joined once again by longtime host of this here show, Tim Donner. Earlier in the show, we were talking the Kamala Harris coronation. But now, Tim, I want to carry on a similar theme, but more the sword of Damocles that is now also hanging over Kamala's head, courtesy of her boss, Joe Biden. That is the Supreme Court reform push that he announced in recent days. What's your take on that?
Well, my initial take, Mark, is that if he was serious about the need to reform the Supreme Court to the extent that he said he is in his op-ed in Washington's most prominent newspaper, in his speech at the LBJ Library in Texas, he would have done it in the first 6 months. That's the honeymoon period. That's where a president is on a long leash, where he can propose things with the, basically investing his high approval rating into something that he feels has to be done that probably wouldn't be able to do in a second term or during a subsequent presidential campaign. But instead, with one foot out the door, in a position where he's not going to be evaluated anymore with this proposal because he's not on the ballot. He says of a system that he has upheld during a 50-year career, we're in a crisis in the Supreme Court, and we need to tear it all down, root and branch, add in term limits, give every president the right to appoint a justice every 2 years, this code of conduct, whatever that's worth. It's simply a way to demonize the conservative justices, particularly Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito. It's really a political gambit that will go absolutely nowhere, and he knows it. The chance of getting a 28th constitutional amendment when he's 6 months from the end, most people don't think, or many at least don't believe he's even really up to the job anymore. And he's going to unleash a movement for a constitutional amendment aimed specifically at Donald Trump and upend the entire Supreme Court. I mean, come on, give me a break. But to the matter of Kamala Harris, if this was serious, again, she would have proposed it. Because him proposing it, he's a dead letter. He's a dead man walking politically. There's nothing that he's going to say from here on in that anybody's going to take very seriously, because he's the lamest of lame ducks as a sitting president who isn't seeking re-election. So it's just a gambit to get some publicity, get the left wing all riled up and say, this is what we wanted all along. But if I'm a Democrat who wants Supreme Court reform, I'd be saying what I started my remarks with, which is, why didn't you do it when it was possible for it to be taken seriously or even instituted?
Well, it's funny that we're talking about he could have done it in his honeymoon period of the first 6 months. But the man's been in Washington, D.C. for 5 decades. If there was any inkling that he thought that the Supreme Court, you know what, there's a problem with the Supreme Court, perhaps we need to look at some remedies, it would have happened before he got into office. And
well, this is a man, this is, the man from Scranton who wears his patriotism on his sleeve and everything. And for 50 years, he bent like the wind to whatever sort of current agenda the Democrats were pushing, whether it be more centrist during the Clinton days, more leftist during the Obama days. But Joe Biden is, a man whose career is all but over. And I think it shows you, look, the one way I think that Kamala Harris could dispel the ideas that all of us have about her lack of core beliefs about her progressive ideology that she bends to, which is a conundrum there. But she has a chance to dispel all of those notions. She's got the national stage for the next 100 days, give or take. So she has every opportunity to prove all those naysayers wrong. But the way you do that is you present yourself as a national leader. You show up when the prime minister of Israel makes a speech to a joint session of Congress, and you sit behind him, even though you hate Israel, which essentially she does. She's aligned with all the anti-Semitic, anti-Israeli, anti-American forces that have exploded around the world. And what you do is you introduce serious reform as a candidate. You don't let the guy you're replacing do the heavy lifting and do the dirty work of announcing something explosive like this. And then you just say, oh, well, I support the president's plan. And the way this is rolled out does not give anybody the sense that Kamala Harris is a serious person any more than we thought she was. But she's still got the chance to do it. She's got a lot of heavy lifting ahead of her.
It's actually just occurred to me here that perhaps there's something at play here, that Joe Biden proposes this kind of reform, and then Kamala Harris can essentially say, if it starts polling very badly and people start thinking, well, hang on, they're about to dismantle.
That was his idea. That was his idea.
It
right.
allows her the opportunity to slip away. However, if it proves popular amongst poll groups, which is really how people seem to be running campaigns nowadays, she can say, well, you know what, Joe and I discussed this a lot, and this is something that we discussed together that I could carry the torch forward for. Then she can adopt it as her own. Alternatively, she's got a third. So she can either A, adopt it fully, B, she can deny it and say, this is not the way I want to go, I want to be a more measured leader. Or she has a third option, doesn't she? She could say that, you know, I know that a lot of people are worried about perhaps the extremity of reforming root and branch the systems that have kept our country at peace for 200 years more. And that is, I want to offer a slightly different version that doesn't seek to gut the pillars of the United States. And then she can be seen as a moderate or a moderator of difference. Yes. And that's a third option.
She could, but she won't. I mean, she could, but she won't.
I think she might if it's politically
terrified. She's terrified of her progressive base, just like Joe Biden was. He was dictated to by the progressive base. He made a deal with Bernie Sanders to put so many of Bernie's people into his cabinet. He's bowed to basically most of the unreasonable Democratic demands for upending the Supreme Court, abolishing the Electoral College, packing the Supreme Court, this sort of thing. But she, Kamala Harris, essentially supports all of that, or has in the past, and now will be in a position to have to say, remember what I said about banning fracking, how I'm definitely going to ban fracking. Well, I didn't really mean it. I changed my mind. There's new information about fracking that has caused me to change my mind. See, this is something that a clever politician in Obama, a Clinton, could pull off. It's not something that a Hillary Clinton or a Kamala Harris or a clumsy politician will be able to pull off, especially at this last-minute emergency campaign to become president of the United States.
Let's just very, very briefly, Tim, before we wrap this segment up, let's talk about what, if in some bizarro world, any support came through for the actual amendments he's talking. And I just want to say, you're a guy very familiar with the Constitution. LibertyNation.com is set up to examine the issues of today through the lens of the Constitution, and that's I think that's an important role that Liberty Nation serves. But it seems to me that the whole purpose of lifetime appointments for the Supreme Court is because people aren't looking for an exit. They're not looking for what do I do after this, because they'll be vilified by half the country. So they got to look after what they're going to do when they leave office, right? If there's a term limit. So doesn't that make whatever decisions are made by any of these new Supreme Court justices under the 18-year term limit proposed by Joe Biden, doesn't that make them political actors and therefore politicize the court far more than the alleged MAGA extremists that are on it?
That is the best description that I've heard of why term limits are a terrible idea. But it's also the best description of exactly what the Democrats want to do. They want to politicize the one non-political branch of government. And we shouldn't be surprised because they have relied on the courts to ram through unpopular progressive ideas that got no traction at the ballot box. So they used the courts to try and push them through as hard as they can. And now they can't do that because it's a 6-3 conservative majority. Look, this is hate. This is envy. This is fear. This is fury. Biden and Harris and the Democrats are furious that Donald Trump got 3 appointments in 4 years and was able to change the court, basically change the whole face of the Supreme Court through the system. But this is what happens when a party is driven by emotion and by one-step thinking, as the Democrats are. We're upset that he got all those appointments. Trump got 3 in 4 years. Biden only got 1. It's not fair. Let's tear down the system and make it in our own image. This is exactly what this is. They're furious. They're envious that Trump got a chance to redefine the court and they have to live under it. The degree of fury and envy involved in that is almost incalculable.
If I may borrow a term from Dean Wormer of Animal House, envious, furious, and hateful is no way to go through life. We'll be back with Tim.
It's always good, Mark. I love when you quote the great philosophers.
The great philosophers. We'll be back with Tim after this short break. Don't go anywhere.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.